In France, gosse means kids, but in Canada it means testicles. Hi, I'm Sofiane and welcome to Babbel Explains, France vs Canadian French, and in this video I'll teach you some important differences between the two dialects. But before we jump in, make sure to subscribe. French is the 7th most spoken language in the world, with nearly 270 million speakers. A large population of French speakers lives in France, of course, but also in Canada, mainly in the provinces of Quebec and New Brunswick. But France and Canada sit on different continents separated by an entire ocean. So naturally, different French dialects have developed. These differences can be seen in each country's slang words, accent and pronunciations. I was born and raised in France, but currently I'm living in Montreal. So I run every day into, let's say, confusing moments. Let's start with slang. In France, a lot of our slangs is influenced by the heavy migrational patterns from Northern Africa. In traditional French, you say j'aime for I like. But instead, a lot of people say je kiffe. The word kiffe comes from Arabic, meaning to enjoy. In France, we use a ton of verlan. Verlan is a used slang where the words are split and flipped. You can think of it as kind of Pig Latin but in French. For example, the French word for woman is la femme. But since the words are flips and twists, we would say la meuf instead of la femme. While French is super influenced by the Maghreb, Quebec slangs is rooted in Quebec's Catholic history. Here in Quebec, it's not uncommon to hear someone yell tabernacle, which is the equivalent of the F word. The funny thing about this is that this word comes from tabernacle, an archaic Catholic word that is still used today. It's where you keep the Eucharist. So if you're driving and accidentally hit something on the street, you might yell tabernacle, c'était quoi? Or fuck, what was that? Imagine if an English-speaking person ran around saying damn it, holy water. Even though English speakers wouldn't say that, many of them would say like God damn it or Jesus Christ, which are both clearly religious. So hey, in the end, it looks like Canada and the USA have a lot more in common than we think. A few other religion-inspired words are calice, baptême and sacrement, which literally translate to chalice, baptism and sacrament. Despite these being all religious words, they pack a punch as swear words in Quebec. Another major difference between France and Canada is l'accent. Due to the colonial history of France in Canada, Canadian French is still influenced by the 16th and 17th century version of the language. After the British began to occupy French-speaking regions of Canada, Canadian French and French from France started to linguistically grow in different directions. And since Canada was part of the New World, many of the French speakers were isolated, which created its own set of pronunciation differences over time. For example, the French-Canadian accent is super nasally. They tend to speak slower and elongate their words. Think of the pace and elongation that most southern US accents have. It's kind of like that. The French accent, on the other hand, is very staccato, quick and airy. Here, an expression to show you the difference between the two. In France, we would say Est-ce que tu veux faire ça? Whereas in Quebec, they will say Tu veux-tu faire ça? Hear the difference? Here, another example. In French, we will say Tu sais où est-ce que je pourrais garer ma voiture? Whereas in Quebec, they will say Sais-tu où je peux parquer mon char? Both countries also have different grammatical inversions. An inversion is flipping of the words used to indicate that a question is being asked. An equivalent in English will be Are you going to the store? vs You going to the store? The latter didn't invert the R and U, but it relies on the tone of the speaker to understand that a question is being asked. But in French, the inversion or asking a question would look something like this. In French, to start a question, we will say Est-ce que tu veux? Whereas in Canada, we will say Tu veux-tu? See how in Canada the est-ce que isn't used, but instead they rely on the inversion to convey the message. Here's an example for you. In French, we will say Est-ce que tu as vu mon parapluie? Whereas in Quebec, you will say Qu'as-tu vu mon parapluie? One important difference between these two countries is their approach to language preservation. Quebec passed a law to protect the French language in 1974. This law is called Loi 101. So while France often use English words in the language, Quebec goes out of this way to translate every single English word to French. For example, in France, you will see stop signs that say stop. But here in Quebec, you can see stop signs that say arrêt, which literally translates to stop. In Quebec, there is an exact French translation, whereas in France, we use an anglicized version. For example, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, was translated as La Malédiction du Black Pearl in France. But in Quebec, it was translated to La Malédiction de la Perle Noire. See how the Franco-Canadian version has a direct French translation? This is to preserve the French language as much as possible in the region. In French, you will say "Ah, c'est le week-end," which clearly comes from English. But in Canada, you would say "Ah, c'est la fin de semaine," which literally translates to the end of the week. Okay, let's start with everyone's favorite, shopping. For example, in France, you will say faire du shopping. But in Quebec, you will say magasiner, which literally translates to do the stores. There are so many differences between France and Quebec accents and varieties that we cannot possibly cover them all today. But the main thing to keep in mind is that just like a British person visiting the US, French speakers speak the same language and will be able to understand each other. There might be a moment of confusion when you realize that maybe some words are used differently, but at the end of the day, you'll get the gist. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Babbel Explains. À bientôt!